Today with technology, people are traveling, exchanging ideas, and sharing information at a higher rate than ever before. Scary. Good news is, they've been doing this for about 500 years. There are implications for how mobility affects everyday life, and history can tell us about some of the major trends about what technology does. I'd like to draw out 4 themes that I've seen that characterize what technology does to human relationships in the long era of modern mobility. Friend overload, fringe users, social trauma, and political polarization. We think that social interaction just becomes more fluid in ages of mobility, but in fact, in the 19th century transportation boom, many people became too overwhelmed to interact. Their cities were filling with strangers who all dressed alike, and it was hard to locate members of the same in-group in a way that it hadn't been in life in the village. Many people stopped speaking to each other. They started warning their children to avoid strangers, even rearranging their parks and restaurants to include new structures, like fences and supper booths, where you could hide instead of interacting. People didn't want to just interact with anyone. They sought out comfortable places like clubs, libraries, and churches, where they could interact with people who looked just like them. Finding friends can overload users, who look for new ways to cushion themselves against the noise. So think about that next time you add friends in Facebook. My second theme is about fringe users. Not everyone becomes mobile at once. This theme is a little bit longer. I'm going to talk about 3 groups of users who became mobile at different times: aristocrats, trade guilds, and Quakers. In the 17th century, the only people who had access to funds while traveling were a small group of aristocrats who had created a system of banks founded on mystical rituals for trusting each other as brothers. They were called Freemasons. In every age, communities emerge that use technology of travel for new purposes. These depend on ritual, community, and their own institutions to secure their individuals certain forms of freedom. The medieval church secured amnesty and the freedom to travel for its pilgrims, who often became diplomats for cities, operating outside of the law of kings. Outside of the church, connections grew between guilds of artisans and traders, who also cultivated information exchanges. They founded free cities based on the travels of their tradesmen. Guilds were able to secure the amnesty of their cities from the wars that ravaged medieval Europe. During the Enlightenment, the journeyman apprentices went on tramp from town to town, seeking freedom through mobility from the harsh regulation of the guild masters. The alliances of journeymen who helped each other on the way, donating food, beer, and information about job openings to the traveler who showed up with a secret handshake. These developed into the first trade unions. So from church to guild to journeyman, each of these institutions depended on a new group that had harnessed mobility, transport, and secret institutions to protect their own in-members. The groups that first adopt technology quickly grow into their own strong communities, characterized by particular politics and rituals. A third example is the Quakers, who in the Enlightenment in England became some of the most technologically savvy and well-connected people in the entire civilization. In 18th century England, innkeepers became key figures in the emergent ties of political travelers, scientists, surveyors, landscape painters, and government administrators, who were the first truly mobile professions in that era. These professions depended upon innkeepers for information and advice about unknown territory. How do I take the connection to the next village? Where do I get the ford to cross this river? The innkeepers were from an outside caste. They were usually Quaker and nonconformist Protestants in larger numbers than in any other profession. And here's the reason. Many of them had gone into the innkeeping trade because of laws that forbade Quakers and nonconformists from carrying on regular professions inside the limits of any town. Only at a safe distance from town could they manage a business legally. So, in large numbers, Quakers went into professions like innkeeping, which put them on the outsides of society. In this case, a taboo became a virtue, and an outside group became central to the flow of information in the first stage of transport. Being on the fringe kept them in the news. My third theme has to do with social trauma. Psychologists first coined the term trauma when they were discussing the effects of a 19th-century railway crash on the passengers inside. British nationalism had its earliest origins in the dramatic blizzards of 1817 that snowed in stagecoaches where passengers froze dead together. Both prompted large discussions in the public press about how people belonged to a larger community with ties of mutual responsibility to each other. They prompted new regulation and new investment in the safety of technology, new discussions of what it meant to belong to a nation, new ideas about how you might have undergone the same psychological experience as someone next to you who you had never met before. Dramatic events of violence change the way people think about their technology. These events cause individuals to reimagine the way their technology is reshaping society. In normal time, individuals don't think of technology as uniting them in a single community of users. Events of great proportions break down barriers and cause people to reimagine themselves as a larger community. So when we think about the tsunami, the Virginia Tech shootings, and the recent elections, we're talking about events where community responded to news very quickly. Community understandings were reshaped in a very short period of time. My fourth theme about how mobility is changing community relationships has to do with political polarization. This one is a little bit on the fringe of immediate usability, maybe, but it falls into a larger category of unintended consequences of a project where mobility was supposed to bring unity. Journalists like asserting that transport brings peace, but sometimes mobility creates war. Britain built roads and railroads at home and in India on the hopes of integrating the nation through trade. In fact, these corridors politically polarized both nations because the roads themselves became a commodity fought over by rival political factions. In both places, political factions quickly emerged between the groups on the nation's edge, who wanted more roads but couldn't afford to pay for them, and those who lived in the nation's center but weren't willing to pay for the roads they didn't need. Pro-highway factions at the nation's edges pressed for tighter government control of the roads as resources. Localists at the center wanted a more libertarian government, with little startups making roads and railroads only at the village level. Not everyone has the same view of who should control the technology market, and some of those divides in basic features of geography and economic context end up playing a larger political role. Later technology revolutions, from the telegraph to the telephone, proved that corporate monopoly and government subsidy are heavily political issues which can play out according to a variety of government scenarios, but also a variety of users whose situation in country, city, poor or rich determines the kind of market that they themselves want to imagine. So, mobility may be growing, but the tech gadgets for mobility may keep abounding and improving, but the changes mobility inspires on the community level are unpredictable in the extreme. Sometimes mobility pulls strangers together, but sometimes it drives people to hunt for privacy. Sometimes it creates major legal and political tensions. The most successful adopters may be people on the fringe. That's the perspective from Doomed to Repeat. I've put the text and some links at doomedtorepeat.com. This is Jo Guldi saying good luck with the future.